The mill, for the first part of its life, was owned and worked by the manor. These huge barns have been the dominant feature at the manor of Temple Cressing for centuries. In this programme, I'm trying to find out about the mill's past, so I've come to the manor to find out something about the early owners. The first documented owner was Harold, who was king before the Norman invasion. It was then given to Count Eustace, and it went to his daughter Matilda, who married King Stephen, and so became queen.
In 1137, Queen Matilda gave the manor to the Knights Templar, and it was they who built these marvellous barns, the great big wheat barn and the barley barn. And the reason for that was that the manor was to raise money so as that the Knights Templar could carry out their works in the Holy Land. It was a means of funding the Knights Templar. But when you look at the scale that they were operating at, you realise how impressive a gain in money that was, because these are just great cathedrals of wood.
The main posts were just squared off trees. These are among the oldest barns in the world, the earliest being made in the 12th century. Grain was threshed out of the stooks of wheat and barley in the barns. The grain would be taken to the mill to be ground, which had a similar wooden construction to the barns and therefore vulnerable to the entry of mice. To reduce the amount lost to mice, the mill and barns had working cats. The Knights Templar were warrior monks, founded to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land. But their detractors, envious of the wealth and power of the order, accused them of holding secret meetings and of having cats in their church services. They were arrested and dispossessed of all their lands, and accused of worshipping the devil, so the mill and manor were given to the Knights Hospitallers. The barns remain, but what was the manor's chapel like, where those secret activities were said to happen? Excavations are in progress to find out.
It's a rectangle.
Right.
It's a rectangular chapel. We were hoping that we would find an apse on the end of it, but so far there's no evidence of that.
Right, so there's no rounded shape at the end at all?
No, it would be appropriate for the period, but and for the Templars indeed,
Right.
but not so far. We haven't got one yet.
Templars often had round naves, didn't they? But
That's right. The Knights Templar are always credited with making round churches in imitation of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. In actual fact, the Hospitallers, the Knights Hospitaller, their rival order, made as many round churches as the Templars did, and the Templars made a great number of square churches. So it really is, I think it was a question of the choice of the architect at the time.
Right, and here on this site, it's
It happens to be a rectangular one.
In this ecclesiastical manor, the mill did not just grind corn, it also treated woolen cloth by fulling. But can the excavations shed any light on whether the monks had their own sheep? Inside the mill, I looked through the finds.
These animal bones, which have been excavated from the Templar site, are all early medieval, and they give a great deal of evidence to what was going on in the manor around here. Sure, you had Knights Templars and the Knights Hospitallers followed them, but by looking at these bones, you can start to see the livestock that they had, not only at the manor, but that would have also been down in the fields beside the mill here. And certainly we can see that there are cattle here, as you might expect. There are also pigs in quite good numbers. But you've got a very good number of sheep. Now, around here today, sheep are a complete rarity. It's an arable county. But the evidence like this is as strong as you can get from this sheep skull, that the sheep were in large numbers. And that, of course, fits in exactly with the life that happened with the mill as time went on, with its connection with the wool trade. But only one bone I've been able to find so far in amongst these excavated ones from the site that really, for me, give one more insight into the owners of the manor house, the Templars, and that's there's a single cat bone because of the long continuing story of the tie-up between cats and Templars.
Leroy, one of my present-day mill cats, sits on the fence of the Tenterfield behind the mill, where the cloth used to hang to dry, oblivious of the mayhem caused by his predecessors. When the mill stopped working, it was bought by Judge Llewellyn in 1947. I spoke to his son Charles about the cats he remembered.
I've got a fine pair of working mill cats now, but what were the denizens of the mill in your day? Well, we had quite a lot of cats, actually. We had 2 moggies. There was a big ginger cat, inspiringly called Ginger. What else? And then there was a tabby called Tigger, another piece of inspiration. And then we had 3 Siamese cats. There was the mother, Jemima, and her 2 sons, Tiny and Thompson.
Right.
Yeah. Thompson was an interesting one because he got run over one Sunday on the road, and my father took him up to orthopaedic surgeon at the hospital, who set his back leg in plaster. So far from having been put down, he actually recovered and lived for another 8 or 9 years with only a slight limp.
Well, strangely enough, Leroy's not that dissimilar, because he's sort of bionic cat. One of his back legs has been put together very delicately by a surgeon the same way, and he also walks with a slight limp. So perhaps we've had generations of mill cats with slight limps going along.
Through the centuries, cats' hunting skills have been important in the economic running of watermills. But with the mill in retirement, Leroy can be more leisurely. Both archaeology of distant times and living memories of recent times can help piece together a picture of times past at the mill. It's spring, and living indicators of times past are appearing. Garlic mustard was gathered from beside the mill leat for use as an antiseptic poultice. Despite that, it's food for the orange-tipped butterfly. But there are more substantial living indicators near the mill.
What I'm doing, despite all the noise, is actually helping to restore this part of the marsh wood here. Because what's happened is this tangle was a coppice stool, but it's been left for the last 40 years. It's just got top heavy. And for something that's been growing for hundreds of years and providing a crop every few years in a very productive way, suddenly its roots were being pulled out of the ground as just the weight of it pulled it over. And on some of them, they've come right out of the ground and have died. So by, in effect, starting the coppice regime again by cutting back towards the base, the roots that are there can just bring the whole thing back to life again.
In the past, the coppice stems will be cut at different ages, some bigger, some small. This historic management of the coppices around the mill gave a range of size of wood that could be used for different purposes. It was the mill's own living timber yard, with wood grown to size, large for fence posts, small for wattle and daub or tool handles. But its main use was to grow firewood for all the heating and cooking needs. In addition to the mill's water, the coppice was the other energy provider for the household. This individual coppice stall is many feet across, which reveals that it's been repeatedly cut for centuries. But at its centre is another indication of great age, wood anemones. Wild spring flowers, like the primrose and wood anemone, are relics of a more ancient woodland landscape. Ramsons, the wild garlic of old woods. And lesser celandine that open to greet the sun when the coppice is cut. All of these plants, but particularly the completely green dog's mercury, indicate that the mill's landscape of channels and coppice was cut direct from the original ancient woodland. And yet it's the bluebell of all these flowers that is the most evocative indicator species. Bluebells are found growing along the medieval ditch and bank that is the historic boundary of the mill's marsh and woods. Spring around the mill reaches its peak when the blossom covers the blackthorn like snow.
One of my greatest pleasures of the springtime in the marsh, when the blackthorn blossoms about, the warblers are singing, is the marsh marigold. These wonderful, large, gold, showy flowers, they are easily the showiest of the buttercup family, are everywhere you look in this part. And yet when I was a lad, which is not so long ago, they were very common throughout Britain. But sadly now, with so much drainage, they've become, while not a rarity, certainly a lot less common.
As conditions for plants, like the marsh marigold, have been kept by the mill's water channels, we can see, directly before us, what generations have seen in times past. While the more recent Georgian parts of the millhouse are brick, the 16th century downstairs and 17th century upstairs of the older part are timber framed, filled in with wattle and daub from the mill's coppice. At the dissolution of the monasteries in 1541, the mill went into private ownership, but was still part of the manor. It was bought by a consortium who split the estate up and sold off blocks. The mill and its land was sold by Dame Mary Tuke to Sir Thomas Davis in 1679, and a document concerning the sale was witnessed by the diarist John Evelyn. In 1707, new works were started by a new owner.
We're just so lucky with this mill because at the County Record Office there is this wonderful collection, a roll of documents. And what they are the artisans, the workmen's records of everything they did in 1707 on the repair and the restoration, the new workings of the mill, but also of the mill house. This one is going on about the mill house, and if I open it very carefully, they pulled the mill house down completely and did underpinning, but not underpinning as we would talk about it today, because when they're talking about underpinning, and remember it's a timber framed cottage, underpinning of a brick and a half thick. It's not very much really, is it? But it costs 17 shillings and sixpence, which of course was a lot of money. We've got other things here. I mean, this roll here is just so wonderful. A bill for the work done by the order of Mr. Draper, begun July the 31st, 1707. And what it is going down for his work and the work of a labourer, for his work and 2 labourers and so on. And the sort of prices you're getting are 4 shillings and threepence for a day, 3 shillings for a day, and that's of 3 guys working for a whole day. And it comes to the grand sum of many, many, many days' work of £6, 12 shillings and 4pence, and that's a lot of digging that you're able to get for that. What have we got here? There's work here for the supply of nails, £5, 13 shillings and sixpence in 1707. And what have we got here? The millwright's work. Now, of course, for a mill, this is very important stuff. And you'd expect with the millwright that you'd be talking huge sums of money. Well, again, for one day's work for myself and my man, 5 shillings. So okay, it was expensive, but it wasn't exorbitant. One of the nice things about this mill, again, because we've got this wonderful collection of records, is you can trace down not just people's work, but you can also trace down virtually individual planks of wood. You can find where something was attached to the mill head and so on. And again, the detection work goes on, looking at what is there now and going back through the records and seeing if you can find one thing or another. But one thing which is useful from this record for this mill, and records like this for 1707 are unusual in Britain, we've got the price of a pair of millstones, and they were quite expensive. One pair of millstones
£11 1 shilling.
That would be £8,000 a new pair in today's money. No wonder they were loath to throw them away, even after they were worn out. And watermills traditionally use one of them as a front doorstep. (1708) Item. It is agreed between William Draper, owner, and Daniel Wade, tenant miller, that the said Daniel Wade shall not coppice or top any tree not heretofore lopped or topped. Item. The said Daniel Wade shall keep scoured and cleaned yearly all banks by the foresaid mill stream, and shall keep in good and sufficient repair the said mill. Unlike the 1707 rebuild, no documents survive the one of the late 18th century, but for that we can read the building itself.
These elm floorboards are one of the really great things about the mill. As you go further up the mill, sure, there's an admix of pine as well as elm, but here on the working floor, where it was important to have good solid boards, that's exactly what they've got. Why? Well, it's very simple, because you can have quite a wide board, as these are, and although they're reasonably thick, of course, they will always be thinner than the width, and they have cross fibres. And as the fibres cross over, they're able to take an awful lot of movement on top without splitting. So they've remained over a couple of centuries incredibly well. Now, had they been oak, you'd have had a problem, because what we've got here is an oak post. And this is even older. This oak post, as far as we can work out for this building, dates back to about 1650. And really, for the size of the room and all of the building on top, plus these enormous beams that go across, you'd think, whoa, that really is much too slender. Surely the whole thing's going to come down. No, because oak is quite different from elm. Oak is incredibly good under compression, and these well-seasoned by now posts have been able to take an enormous weight on top and put up with it. But of course, they're not just taking the weight themselves. The whole design of the building is very clever. What you have is an arrangement, whereas when you go to the edges of the building, the walls actually get thinner as you go up. So rather like a Tudor building that jetties out, this building jetties out into itself. So you get less weight on the bricks as you go up. With every story of the building that you go up, these large beams just step that bit further out, so the end posts take all of the weight. So it's an incredibly good design. But as you have with many old buildings, you get reuse of materials. So these particular ones are reused from the 1650s, and they've given the reason for the ceiling height here. But these ones, as far as we know, are from about 1780, whereas some of the posts downstairs are from the 1707 rebuild. But when you look at the size of these beams, you'd think that nobody would ever carve into them. I mean, this one is about 13 metres long here. It's a major support beam. It's incredibly deep. So why on earth do you find this and this carved all the way through? You'd think it would weaken it. Well, fortunately, no. You'd think it would be a great deal of effort to do it, so why on earth do it? And then you start looking around and you realise there's another one through the main beam over there, there's another one over there, and you realise, of course, that at various times people have had machinery in here, they've changed it, they've repositioned it, and what you start to be able to do is really be a detective, read the past by looking at these evidences of quite a bit of work to change something from here to there and back again. And this, I suppose, of all those changes is the key one, the major one, because what you can see quite clearly is you've got an easy rhythm, an easy run of all these crossing support beams from the main ones, coming along, and then suddenly here, you've got a complete pig's ear. It's an absolute lash up. You can see where something's been hacked out here, hacked out there, and anything has just been botched in. Now, why on earth has this happened? Well, the simple explanation is that from the water down there where the water wheel used to be, up came a main power drive here after it went from the stones on this floor to take the power to the next floor. And when things were changed round from the old water wheel and the turbine position, it was just hacked out of here And that was just placed in to support it and everything positioned. And what you can read from the timbers is really how the main power drive changed in the centre of the mill.
Going up the mill into the storage bins, there is writing, but it's on the wall. Markings measure the height, and each bin's length and breadth gave the volume of grain. Shovelling out the bins was such a slog that when one was emptied, the mill employees wrote up their name and date. So we meet Mr. Weller in 1897 and Alfred Bierman in 1942. A Victorian sketch of the miller was less than flattering. The external fabric can also be read for clues.
These are the fold marks that you get on late 18th century brick. A lot of people, when they look at brickwork and a large building like this, they try to gauge it from its overall appearance as to, was it at that time or this time or whenever, is it Georgian and so on. Sure, all of that works, but as well as the general overall feeling and what the windows seem to be like, there are things that you can definitely look for. Size of bricks is certainly one thing. Tudor bricks are smaller and they get bigger as they go on through the years. The type of bond is another, and in this one you can see clearly it's what's called English bond, where you have lines of the ends coming on and then the whole body, so it's headers and stretchers, rather than the later Flemish bond. All of that's fine, but you can actually get more information from the brick itself. This fold mark here tells us that it was made in a yard where they had a fair amount of room. These are handmade bricks, and they were made and laid out in racks where there was enough air to breathe in amongst them that they could lay them to dry in a herringbone fashion. And this is the pressure mark that one brick, as it was drying, left upon another brick. And as you move from the back end of the 18th century into the early 19th century, more demand for bricks meant that there was less space in yards, and so the stacking style changed and bricks started to be laid side by side, and you start finding then that instead of a shape like that, you get a parallel shape to the brick. It's only a small thing, but things like that can help you when you're looking at something like a handmade brick. But one of the great things, it's not just all about hands, feet get in too, because in yards people walk around, and here you've got the clog marks of somebody's shoe.
To see how the fold marks appear, I visited Peter Minter's Bulmatai brickyard.
Your handmade bricks, Peter, these seem to look like 19th century bricks to me.
Well, we're making it in exactly the same way. This yard goes back before the 19th century, and we're using techniques which have lasted since then, so we're getting exactly the same marks.
Right. So why is it modern bricks just don't show these?
They're not basically making many handmade bricks, and when they do, they're drying in controlled atmosphere, not drying outside in a traditional manner.
Right. Now, these are crisscross when they're arranged here. Skinking, right. Now, the way you've got them aligned here, this is how they used to be doing it in the 18th century?
Yes, we do it this way as they get dry enough to handle, but they were actually pitching them like this to start with. They'd have been closer and pitched in the same way, on an angle rather than straight as we do now.
Right, so that explains why, although your lines are straight here, it's not from this later drying, it's from this first drying out here.
Exactly.
In the mills, times past, landscape and building held together and can be read from a combination of archaeology, the living evidence of coppicing and spring flowers, the documentary evidence of the workers' bills, and the fabric of the mill itself. Yet there is also the evidence of practical activities enshrined in traditions. Marsh hay was cut for the mill's horses. The marsh also yielded a cure for the smells of living in musty, damp buildings.
In a natural marsh, historically, there will be a great profusion of these wonderful plants like codlins and cream. But in a managed marsh, well, people often use it just either for grazing or to raise fodder. But historically, there was a great use for
rearing something like this. It's a natural plant, it grows in the marsh superbly well by itself. Has a most wonderful, sweet vanilla scent. And it's called meadow sweet, so it lives entirely up to its name. But historically, people would allow it to be over a huge area and then would come out and cut it by armfuls and then carry it back into villages and to mill houses where there was damp on the ground and those sort of festering smells that will be lingering over winter, augmented by all the rubbish that dropped from the kitchen table. Well, scrape it aside if you could, but nothing really conquered it as well as meadowsweet. And because of that, it was Queen Elizabeth I's favourite flower, because even in the highest place in the land, the floor could still smell putrid. How it worked was the combination of the sweetness of these wonderful vanilla-y flowers plus the smell of the leaves. Now you take those off and you rub them. It's exactly the same as if you're walking on them. Up comes this much more sharp scent. So as people walked around in the houses, you would get the sharpness of these leaves, the vanilla-y, sugary smell of the flowers, and it was just a joy to be around instead of everything being, well, dreadful.
Today, this use of this product of the mill's landscape has slipped into times past. But in midsummer, meadowsweet is still cut here and taken to the village of Writtle, where the meadowsweet, hay and rushes are traditionally carried on a cart in procession around the green. By celebrating the taking of rushes to be spread in the village church, historically this reminded villagers to renew the rushes on their own earth floors. Times past that have disappeared are still remembered.
We give thanks for the countryside around us, for all that is good and beautiful and true. We ask God's blessing on all the people of this village, all who live and work here. We give thanks for this rush cart celebration, and may the sweet-smelling herbs remind us of the joy and the goodness of life. Amen.
Join me in the next episode of The Mill's Life, when we come up to date with changing times.